Hi everybody, the Mature Simmer here. Welcome to City Skylines 2. Starting up this new series, and I'm hoping that you'll come along on the journey and that we can learn together. So the first thing I'm going to address is probably the 800-pound gorilla in the room. If you've done any sort of research on this game, or have not been under a rock, everyone knows that the performance of the game has been called into question by every reviewer and by everyone out there. I've spent about 8 hours in the game at this point now. Good portion of that was trying to figure out, is it really playable or not, and is there really anything that I'm going to be able to share with people? And I'm happy to say that it certainly is, but obviously that is going to be heavily dependent on your system capabilities. So some basic specs of my equipment, the key things that you need to know so that you understand what I am using, and you can then determine what you have and where it falls related to that. So for a processor, I have a Intel i9 10900F, which is a 10th generation processor, so it's a few years old. I have 32 gig of RAM, and my graphics card is an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3070, which has 8 gig of VRAM on it. The general consensus of everything I've read and my experience as well is the single most important hardware component for this game is your graphics card. I feel that's unfortunate given that this is a sim, and in my mind, if I'm simulating and calculating, that should be more CPU intensive than it is graphic intensive. But we have what we have from Paradox and Colossal Order here, and so if you want to use it, you need to play within the sandbox that you are given. So to save you some time, I'm going to include links to the two main articles that I have used to ultimately determine which settings to make changes to, and those will be linked down below in the description of this video. One of them is an official document from Paradox, and another is from Reddit. The settings I'm using currently are a combination of both of those pieces of information. When I loaded the game set itself to high as the global graphics quality. Because I've made some changes, that now says custom. We'll start with the changes or the things you may want to consider on the simple tab. So screen resolution was one of them, and the suggestion was to set it at 60 Hertz, and this particular screen resolution, which is one that my system was capable of operating under. There are other suggestions to either set the display mode to full screen windowed or to disable VSync, and you can see I've done neither. At this point, the game seems to run fine for me with the settings as they are. There was also a suggestion at some point of setting the game cursor mode to free. Not sure what that really does for video settings, but went ahead and did it, and I've been able to play fine, so it doesn't seem to cause me an issue. And then the depth of field mode is suggested to be disabled. Dynamic resolution scale quality, you can play with this. I've gone ahead and disabled it entirely. There was some discussion in one of the documents about what you may or may not want to do, but basically what the game will do is it tries to adjust the frame rate based on the load on your computer, and I have found that having it at any level, even low, made for a much poorer experience than simply having it disabled. I don't feel I'm missing anything, and I feel the visuals get substantially worse by turning it on at all, and I think it's because of all the changes that are going on and then what it's trying to do. It almost gets disorienting. So I am running that as disabled. The next big thing for frames per second is volumetrics. There's a suggestion of either using low or medium. You can see I have it set to low. I've turned it on to medium. I don't know that I see a difference. So to maximize the frames per second, I've gone ahead with the low suggestion that they have provided. The next setting, global illumination quality, is suggested to be set to disabled. And then depth of field quality and motion blur are also suggested to be disabled, but it has been indicated they're not substantial drivers of frames per second, so depending on how you prefer to have things work, you may want to adjust these differently. There's a low or a high, and a low and a medium and a high, respectively, on each of these. Depth of field basically creates a little bit of a blur in the distance, and motion blur creates that movement that you see in videos that kind of shows the background sliding. I don't know how else to describe it. I think, if you've seen motion blur, I think you know what it is, and you may either like it or not. I don't feel it's necessary, so once again, to go ahead and get the maximum performance out of the game as it sits today, I currently have those turned off. And finally, on the simple graphics settings, the last item that was addressed was the level of detail. Adjusting this, my understanding was it determines how close you have to get to something, whether it's a sim, a vehicle, or a building, before it really starts rendering it in any level of detail. On default, with high settings, obviously this is set to high. They suggest going down to low, but that you could potentially use medium. I am at medium because I haven't seen any issue with it, and to me the level of detail is probably the thing that's going to drive the most important, the most perceptible visual impact that we'll see. Let's go over to advanced. So there's one setting here in the shadow quality section. You can see it's about 3/4 of the way down through the menu system. Terrain cast shadows. That is on originally. The suggestion was to turn that off. So those are the modifications that I have made that seem to have had the most direct impact. Now when I hop in the game, from time to time I'll pop up a little measuring tool that is going to show frames per second so that you can see what the game's actually operating at. I'll probably put that on and off at various times. Possible during this first episode I'll just leave it on, but we're not going to see much of an impact until we get larger. A lot of my testing was done courtesy of some save files that City Planner Plays provided for folks, of a city that he built that range from 10,000 in population up to 100,000. I think there are 5 different sizes of cities that are there that you can try, and I went through all of them. And so with these settings, with the hardware that I've talked about, at a city with 100,000, I was still achieving a frame rate right around 30 frames per second, which is absolutely, in my mind, acceptable for a game like this. 30 frames per second is really full motion video. I get folks have gotten hung up on the hardware community telling them 60 frames per second is somehow what you want, but you can do your own research to verify what I'm going to say here. But the human eye basically processes images and sends them to our brain at 30 frames a second, so anything beyond that is just smoke and mirrors for what you're really perceiving. But your visual cortex is processing about 1/30th of a second, so that is how you get to 30 frames a second, because it basically looks at an image 30 times in a second. So the first decision you're going to need to make once you come in is which map you're going to begin with. You can see I have 12 maps here. I did purchase the Ultimate Edition as a pre-order, so 2 of these maps you may not have if you have not done that, and that would be San Francisco and UTAMPIA. Those are additional maps available if you pre-ordered the game at the highest level, which basically includes the DLCs that will be coming out in the future and so forth. You'll notice over here on the side that you've got some information about each map. The second to the fourth items are crucial because those are things that you can't directly change, as well as the last item. You can affect that a little bit, but I'll get to that in a moment. Climate, which is the temperature ranges that your map will experience. So in this case, at Archipelago Haven, we're not going to get snow because it's only going to go to 46 degrees Fahrenheit. It's not going to snow. The latitude is northern. That is going to determine when your seasons happen, the time of year. Obviously in the northern season, June, July, is going to be summer, but in the southern hemisphere, that's going to be winter. And then, of course, the buildable area. That is the land available to you that you can build upon. You're not going to be able to impact that. In this case, there's only 16% buildable area on this particular map. That may be what you want to work with in a very confined space, or you may want a little broader palette. Keep in mind, however, that the City Skylines 2 maps are much larger than City Skylines 1, and you have the ability to unlock map tiles in a different way. The theme, while set on the map, can be changed as you're building, so you can go from North American to European. So that one isn't as hard and fast a rule, so don't let that necessarily be a key driver for you. It could be important, but it shouldn't be something that, wow, I want European buildings, so I'm not going to do a map with a North American theme. You can put European buildings on a North American themed map and vice versa. So the outside connections that are given, you can see these are the 5 that are available. Some of the maps don't have certain ones. You have to build to the edge of the map to make connections. Keep that in mind where this is provided to you on the map at that point in time as a starting point. So that can be very important because City Skylines 2 handles some of these things differently. Now I will make a comment here on the natural resources. I don't think there was a game update, but I will say with certainty that the natural resources numbers have now changed. I saw some early content creator videos prior to release that were showing these that had numbers similar to this, but when I loaded the game at launch yesterday, I was getting, for forest and ore, numbers like 0.3, 0.1, and so forth, and so it was very confusing, and I began to wonder if I had some sort of a problem with the game. I reloaded multiple times. I continued to have that, but now this looks a little bit more reasonable. So you'd again click through the maps and you'll see things change and so forth, so you'll kind of decide what you want to go ahead and work with. And so for this, I'm going to go ahead and use the UTAMPIA map, which you can see is the home of Colossal Order. Part of the reason is it has a large range of climate. It has a large buildable area. I don't think that's going to be that important here, especially given that I am not a master of the City Skylines series by any stretch of the imagination. But I'm certainly going to give it the best attempt I can, and hopefully it'll be entertaining as we go along, and I'll share what I know and what I've learned with you from the time I've played, so that will help you get a little bit of a head start, perhaps. So I'm going to go ahead and call this city UTAMPIA, a play on Utopia, and the name of this map and this location. So here you can see you could switch the theme before you start the map up. You could determine if you want left-hand traffic and if natural disasters are going to be on, and if you're looking to play in a sandbox without any of the constraints, you can unlock everything and provide yourself unlimited money. You could have seen in a few seconds the frame rate dropped quite a bit. It went down to 22, but now it's up at 60. Again, it's a blank map. There's nothing that we have on here. It shouldn't be doing much. But what you'll see is the GPU and the VRAM tend to be the things that are way up there. CPU's barely getting used. RAM is a little bit here. These probably will fall a little bit. I typically have seen them in the 70 range for the GPU. You may find, as I have, and it may start to come up in the background, as this runs, your fans on your computer are going to go into overdrive. Now, without the video settings that I showed you, the GPU was running in the 90s and the VRAM was running at like 95 or 97% at any point in the game. So this is absolutely an improvement, and even on a blank map here, if I didn't do anything, I went ahead and was running at about 40 when I came in. So this is already a jump of basically 50% more frame rate with those few settings that I shared with you earlier. Again, the documents are linked below in the description if you want to look through and have something written to walk through, and also to give you some screenshots of where to go and what those things do and explain them to you. I'm hopeful the Paradox and Colossal Order will go ahead and make some changes that will help in the near future, but at least at this point, with what they have near the recommended settings, my machine, I would say, is slightly below that. I can still get a pretty good experience. So if we zoom out here, you can see we've got, this square as our starting square. If you remember, there were lots of external connections or outside connections, so this is a rail line, it appears. This is interesting because there is a highway here. I was seeing this on the map. You can see the names here, and now I understand what they're doing. They're underground. Not sure how I see that view. I'm sure if I start doing roadways and move down, I could see things. And then we also have outside shipping connections, which obviously would be the water that we can get to here. So at some point, I'm sure I'll try to do some things there. And obviously air connections, everything can get to. When I've looked at the starting maps, I think there's one that doesn't have a rail connection and one that doesn't have a shipping connection. All right, so the first thing I like to do is just kind of understand what I've got. In the road tools, we can turn on the contour lines. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And so we can see that right where we get in, we've got a good amount of flat space before we start to, I think, elevate and ultimately get to this more mountainous terrain here. But even so, there's still a good amount of area. We could do some terraforming and so forth to do some things. It's interesting, this being down here, this might be a great place in the future for any either tourism or so forth, where this is a little bit less accessible perhaps. We've obviously got a little bit of space here. I like the fact that it's flat, so this may be an area where maybe I put my industrial and keep things further away. So one of the things I do enjoy in City Skylines 2 is any new things that you haven't looked at have this little green indicator on them. We'll see that as we go forward, how that works. And then if you go into the info panel, we'll see pretty much everything is locked up. So the other thing, though, that is open that we can look at is if we look at the water pollution, we can see the aquifers here in the water, or in the ground. And from what I understand and what I've read, this is important if we look for like geothermal plants, but we can also use this as a water source if we don't want to use the river that's flowing through as a water source as well. But our natural resources, you can see we need to get to milestone 3. I can't really see those specifically, but I think it's helpful to understand that we basically want to stay away from this area because we've got some natural water there, and that can become polluted if we're running industry and so forth there. So we're going to want to be careful with what we do to not contaminate that water source. But I'm thinking, given that we have kind of the ocean on both sides, this may be a good source to just take the you know, the water here. You know, I guess we have the reality if that's really ocean, like, is it fresh water? But the game, as far as I know, doesn't take that into account. I think in City Skylines we did have desalinization plants. So far in anything I've looked at, I haven't seen that dynamic, so I'm going to assume, unless the game tells me otherwise, that this water is usable. I'm assuming if it's not, when we put pumping stations in, we're going to get a warning. So I think that's all I'm able to do early on in determining what I'm going to need to do. Now the question is, this ends up being a pretty easy process on this one, partially because we have so much buildable space. Because in some cases, if you want to do forestry, like obviously this may ultimately turn into a great opportunity for forestry if I want to explore that within the game. It's almost a dividing line here at this contour line, I would think, and that is a long, long way away, but I probably want to respect the topography here and not expand the city too much that way. But I do have this challenge of this underground highway and figuring out how best to get access to that eventually, because I think we're going to want to do that to connect ourselves, you know, more speedily to the outside world. Obviously, you know, this goes here as well. This highway's kind of just bypassing the city, so it may be less important, but at some point in the future, you know, maybe that makes sense. And the one thing I'm trying to figure out, looks like we must have some shipping lane or something there. So that's interesting to understand. But yeah, it would seem this is our expansion direction, our simplest one. Obviously we can go that way too, but you can see, you know, there is a lot of land. Oh, high plane. Kinda, it was in my peripheral vision. I'm like, what is happening? But I thought it was some, yeah, blotch on my monitor, but it's not. As we get ready to begin, it probably makes sense to share what I've understood and what I've seen in using these tools. So the snapping tools obviously existed in City Skylines, but there's some changes here. So this first button toggles everything on and off, just as it did before. We already talked about the last button that shows the contour lines, so this is a way to be able to see that. This is, you know, snap to existing geometry, so it's kind of what is there already. If we turn some of these off, the existing geometry, you'll see here, I'm at a 2-lane road right now, but this is a 4-lane road coming in. I'm able to pick the center, I'm able to, you know, pick a lane. But if I turn on zoning cell length, you'll notice I'm no longer able to get to the center of that road. So that's why at times you're going to have to play with these to kind of determine what you want to have happen. Obviously it makes sense, with this being the main arterial coming into the city, that I continue that, and I'll probably, you know, that may be the simplest thing to do at this point, is just start that off and kind of go forward a bit so that we can, let me turn the contour lines on again just to make sure that I know how far I can go. So I just want to be able to see, so I think I'll go up to there. So you can see we've got that nice little square. It also says 180 degrees. So that way we know we're continuing straight on. I'm going to go ahead and place that. So we've got that main road into the city right away. But that's that second button, snap to 90-degree angles, helps maintain that. A new one in City Skylines 2 is snap to the sides of a building. We don't have any buildings right now, but basically that will allow you to attach things that have to have a roadway connection and so forth, and do things that way. And then the guidelines are the road guidelines that we're used to in City Skylines 1, so when we're going to be using the curve tool and so forth, that will drive some behaviors. And then finally, so you'll see if I have snap to guidelines, it kind of does that. And finally, if I do snap to zone grid, you'll see it jumps to each of those 8-meter squares. That gives you that sort of connection and so forth that you have there. I'm going to leave the snap to sides of the building off. The first decision is really, am I going to do a grid? And I think it makes sense to do that, given the amount of land we have. So I'm going to be a little dull there, although again, when I come on this side, which I probably will do relatively quickly, let's just do that now, I guess. So I'm just going to go to the continuous, which gives us probably the most granular control that we can have. And I'm just going to go out once, click, and that lets me start to set a curve of some sort. And I can just keep doing that and follow the contours here of the topography. Alright, I think that's a good start there, but at least I have kind of the border set so that I know, I kind of want to stay within that space. But then here, I think I can just go straight out. Alright, looks like I see we've got that little building there, so I'm going to use the bulldozer tool and take that out. I'm not really worried about the older buildings that are present. So you can see here these green dots are showing that there are things that we haven't looked at here. So, if I go to the roundabout here and then go off, now there's nothing green that is able to be looked at. All right, so for now, I'm just going to run this near the shore. Well, I'll get close. We'll do that, and then that will give us the start of our grid, or the ability to start, with this corner of going ahead and doing the grid. So I know I've looked up some things. It took me a while. I'm not in the city planning industry in my job or so forth, but I assumed there had to be some resources out there. So I've mentioned on the channel I'm originally from the Chicago area, so I certainly looked that up. The Chicago grid is a 200 by 100 meter grid. It's 330 feet by 660 feet. That goes back to the history of what they called surveying chains. A surveyor's chain in the 18th century was 66 feet long. So they basically made the blocks 10 chains long and 5 chains wide. Basically that made it 1/8 of a mile with the 10 chains. That's the typical grid. That seems a bit large, because if we look at that, I'd have to kind of make a guess here, because basically each of these are 8, but if I went and said I was going to go 100, like, see, I can do 96 or 104. I can't easily in the grid get to that amount, but let's say I did 96 and then came over. See, 200 is more like it's either 196 or I don't know that just seems really big for what I have here. I don't have much room to the edge of the map. That's going to just allow me to get a few blocks in, so I don't think I'm going to do that size. I think I'm going to go down to something a little bit smaller than that, but still kind of keep it interesting, and I'm thinking I'm going to make them wider this way and shorter, so I'm going to go 112 out and then 88 down. Alright, I'm thinking because that is a 4-lane road is the issue that's going on there. So now it's 88. So now I can delete this one. But I think because that's a 4-lane road, it's giving me a bit of difficulty. Alright, and you'll notice it's a bit of a challenge sometimes to stay on exactly. It'll move a few degrees off. I'm just going to be deliberate, and I'm going to draw this grid out for a bit here. So one of the nice features in City Skylines 2 that you weren't able to do in City Skylines 1 is drag across roads like this. So it allows you to lay down a grid very quickly. Just trying to make sure I'm at 90. And there we go. And certainly a question might be, because some of you may have seen, there is this grid tool, and the question might be, you know, why am I not using that? You can. It's definitely finicky, so you have to be really deliberate. So again, we'll go out and click to set the distance there, and then I just have to make sure that I'm aligned, and you can see the roads are aligned. I went up to 96 meters on the height though, so now you can drop it, and so you can very quickly you know, zone things out, but just keep an eye on things, because it's very easy to kind of mistakenly go too far. Just don't feel like I have enough streets, so I may go out one more. Just seems like a very tiny grid right now. I'm kind of crossing that contour line a little bit, but again, it's not hard and fast, and again, there's still good distance here, so over here we may proceed a little further. So I'm going to go ahead then and make the connections back to my grid, or my main arterial there. So one of the things I think I'm going to try to do, create a path network to encourage kind of pedestrian movement around the city here. So I'm thinking we can take advantage of the fact something seems off here. So you can see why perhaps the grid tool is not what you want to do. So first off, it's going to delete the paths that I have, but I think I'm going to take advantage of the fact that the highway runs underneath. So there's a little bit there, but what I determined was I was having difficulty underneath the roadway with the highway underneath. So I had to play with the grid lines and so forth, and kind of turn them off so things weren't snapping. Alright, so I think I'm okay there. I think what I then want to do though is be careful here. Again, honor the topography and the coastline. And then we can just make some connections. So we've got some interesting blocks there, but for the most part, we've got a bit of a standard grid, other than things are broken up here along the main road, which is okay, and then obviously a few other points that are broken off. So the next thing I want to take a look at are utilities. So we have electricity, and we have water and sewage. So again, we can see we've got some new things. Basically, we've got wind turbines. So if we turn this on, we can see wind speed and direction. So you can see we've got a lot of strong wind here. So that may give us some options here for wind power. Thinking we put them across the way, because if you look at this, there'll be 0 to 5 megawatts, and you can see if I put it out here, like it's telling me electricity production literally anywhere is 5 megawatts. So I'm going to get the max. So for 4 of these, it's going to cost me 100,000, and if I was to do a small coal power plant, it also costs me 100,000 and produces 20 megawatts. Now it's kind of guaranteed, but it looks like this map has wind that is pretty solid and is going to keep us up there. I don't think we're in any danger because it wasn't really giving me a range. And the other thing I believe is that the coal power plant needs resources, like you have to actually get it coal and so forth, and so that would create some additional challenges as well. But this is non-polluting. The other option you have in City Skylines 2 is you can go ahead and you can put a transformer over here. Alright, there we go. So it's just because we have that higher pole here, but if I get there, I can get power from the outside. The added benefit this has is I can also then sell excess power, if I have it, to make some additional money. So what I'm trying to figure out, I'm looking at the roadway there. So I'm going to go ahead and place this, but we're also going to put a power generation source of our own in. It's just a question of where, and maybe I'll just put it right here, honestly, since it lets me do that. But then what I can do, because again, with the difference with City Skylines 2 versus 1, all of our utilities are run under the roadway. So if I now do snap to the side of a building, there we go, that it's not doing that, but if I do that and then run this over to the roadway, I now have made my connection. Alright, I'll just run an alley. I thought maybe it would jump over, but clearly it's not. I don't want it above ground. Why did it do that? Okay, I see. I need to go page down and then it'll run underground. So that's connected, and then I need water. So we can see that's still green, and so again, we can do pumping stations, we can do water towers, which lets us get water anywhere. The groundwater pumping station, it has to be on that aquifer and so forth. So one of those things, like if we do that, you can see it turns that on, and then if you place it, you know, the challenge here is you can see there's that item, the groundwater reservoir usage. It's 91%, so that's going to like nearly consume what we have there, where here it would seem this makes sense to go ahead and get our water from this location. I'll put it as far out as I can. Now we need a road. Alright, so that gets that on the road. That then gets, you know, water and power to it. Well, it will get water and power to it, or should. So that should go away in a moment here. Oh wait, I think I know what the problem is. Alright, I think we're okay. There we go. We finally have power going across. And then you can see it's kind of starting to spread out through the grid. And now it has gotten to my pumping station. So it just took a little bit of time, but initially what I thought was happening is that we were across the river and there might have been an issue. But you can see now when we're running, we've got power heading this way. So we are actually exporting 4.7 megawatts of the 5 megawatts we're producing to sell that. And so that is what these transformer connections allow you to do. And given the fact that we have all this wind power, I think that makes some sense. So I don't really like this janky road thing, but I'm gonna leave it because I think I tried it 3 or 4 times and it just, I don't know. Let me see if I do this and do it one more time. So that works. So that gives you an example again of kind of playing with the snap to settings to get what you want. So that is a much smoother road here on Park Street, and that is good because I think I will put a park in here, so it's appropriately named. Now the challenge is Park Street seems to loop around, and I don't think there's a way to do the naming in City Skylines 2 as there was in 1. If there is, I haven't found a way. So you can see it highlights the whole road, but I've not found a way to drag that, either right-clicking or anything, to change it and say I only want, you know, this segment to be Park Street or whatever. So if someone knows how to do that, if someone's discovered that, certainly let us all know down below. That would help. Alright, so we have water, but we don't have sewage. Unfortunately, the only thing they let us do is the sewage outlet. This is all shoreline we really want. Maybe we'll place it out here. And then what I need to do is run, it doesn't need power, it just needs a sewer line. So I will run that. Probably not the best way, but we'll run it underneath there, and that will get us kind of what we need there. One of the questions folks might be looking at is like, wow, I built a lot of roadway, why, and so forth. And some of that is just to be able to get going, but you get a lot more money when you start. Now, things do cost substantially more in Cities Skylines 2 here than they did in the first one. I just noticed some pathing that I can probably do a little bit better on here. Kind of connect the path network together there. I'm not sure. I'm going to leave that for if and when I do a park. But the benefit is then we can start kind of moving along and getting things done. So the next piece that I just want to share here, you can see this is how we now make progress. It's not population based, because as you can see we're at 0 population, but we're almost going to be meeting our first milestone. And that's just because as things go on, as we do things, building roads, doing other things, we do get some benefit from that. But I think at this point we have everything we need, and we can start with some zoning. The RCI meter, as they're commonly known, residential, commercial, industrial. Right now this looks very similar to what we have in City Skylines 1, but this will change as we level up and we start getting different types of demand. It's going to get a lot more of an eye chart, I suppose, but you can see that this residential demand right now is low density demand, and then commercial and industrial are what you'd expect. So per the normal setup, I'm probably going to leave the spaces along the main arterial to be commercial, you know, and maybe do that on both sides and go from there. But you know, maybe we'll start on one side and then maybe a little bit here along the waterfront. So per zoning, you can paint large groups like this, so that this would do that whole section. You can do marquee, which is selecting the area to fill, or you can do one cell at a time. Depending on how you use marquee, it kind of works similarly. But let me do this. We'll go ahead and go down here maybe, and you'll see right away like the bar is impacted immediately. So and so now we've got residential, but commercial and industrial is now immediately starting to grow. You can hit the I key when you're doing this to turn off your info bars, and that will let you see the map a little clearer. So Chirper has some commentary that comes up here and there. So we've got, again, European and North American themes. So I'm just making sure that, yes, we've got European selected. We're going to go with that now. And so this is a little bit, as we see this little erector set of activity going on, this is a bit of what causes the frame rate and the graphic problems. You've got all these cranes moving around as things are getting built. Again, I'm zoomed in a good amount here. You can see my frame rate still staying up. Now, once again, we're just starting out. There's obviously not a lot going on. GPU and VRAM haven't bounced, but you can see the CPU's like doing nothing. So there's just a lot of activity. And the one thing you will notice in the game that has definitely jumped out to me, progression is much more deliberate and much slower, which I enjoy. I think that is good. That's more intentional. Let's see. So we can turn off the snaps here as well. So snap to existing geometry or cell length. So again, I can turn this off and then I can start to get commercial in here. And because of that demand, you can see it's gonna come along pretty quickly. And so looks like we're gonna get a restaurant pretty fast, but right now I'm just gonna zone all the way up the road here because, you know, we've got residential all the way back here. So whether it's someplace to work, someplace to shop or eat, like these are all good things. And so, you know what, I'm gonna not do that because I'm not sure I want the road to go that far. I may change my mind later. Alright, so commercial has already kind of been consumed. You can see it wants more residential, so I'm gonna go ahead. You know, nobody's moved in yet, but it wants more residential. But I'm gonna go ahead and fill the grid out all the way up here. Interesting that we're not, somehow the grid isn't there, but I think that's because the highway's underneath and some things got a little messed up. You know, but hopefully that will start to drive some commercial demand and we should start seeing some activity happening in the city. We'll let this go for a little bit. So we've got our first people moving in. We've got 2 people here in UTAMPIA, and now we start to see a little bit of a challenge I do have with the game the way it sits right now. Literally, other than this has solar panels on it and these are painted differently, these are all the same building model. You know, it tries some variety, like it's got a little bit of a carport or something on one of these. You know, they've got a patio set and a barbecue grill out here. But at the end of the day, until we start getting more assets in the game and so forth, this is pretty cookie cutter if you look at this. So visually, that's part of why I would suggest don't worry about the frame rate too much. There's not going to be much you're going to be looking at. But you can see as these things build and as they progress and people start to move in, like you're getting fences that are showing up, and as these buildings kind of move along, and you know they'll level up just like the other ones did. So one of the things that has been mentioned is that there have been folks that have tested, and that once you get to the point where your buildings are all level 5, like your frame rate, it goes through the roof. That basically a lot of this is the buildings leveling also, and that's, you know, some of what we're seeing here as things go in and out. And so, you know, you can see like the panels are flickering, and so there's some weird graphic things that definitely happen, and part of it, you can see my GPU is now really up there. Frame rate is still decent, but I think we're seeing some of that flickering from some of that. Golly, we still need more residential. And part of it is these are like compared to the North American models, because the map I played with initially was North American. They take up a lot of space. That is going to be a lot more interesting, I think. So let me zone all this back here, and we'll get all of these set. So you kind of want to get there so you can see population increased, citizen happiness increased, and your city will do that, and it'll just progress that way regardless of what you're doing. So you can, just with patience, level up just by waiting for things to happen. The other thing I do notice is it is challenging to be profitable in the beginning. It's challenging to be profitable later, but there's definitely some differences there in how the game looks at things. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and put some commercial spaces down here along the water. So the other thing I'm going to do then is we have some industrial demand. I think I'm going to go ahead and start building out. Let's see, we want to go that way or that way? I think we'll go this way. We're going to keep things, let me see if I can do it with all the snap 2s on. And we'll run this. Just going to go a little bit away from the road here. This does not like what I'm doing. Interesting. Like it's telling me it's an invalid shape. But then maybe what I'll do is I'll instead do things up here right after we get off the bridge. Give it a little bit of space. Oops, I don't need to snap to the side of the building. But if I head out straight across, and let's see, do we want to just take it all the way to the edge? Why not? Alright, and there we go. We've gotten to Tiny Village. So we get some basic information on the rewards. We get 600,000 additional dollars, so that gets us to nearly $1 million, which is nice. We get one of these development points, and then we have expansion permits, which allow us to purchase map tiles. And then we get a lot of things that are accessible to us now. We can take out a loan if we want. The map tiles we talked about, access to the city budget and the city statistics, which we didn't have before. We start getting medium density row housing, and then under roads we're getting a 5-lane asymmetric roads, so that's 3 lanes one way, 2 lanes the other way, and then 4 and 5 lane one-way roads. I don't know why you'd use that. And then we get a certain kind of bridge. But then as far as new services, we're getting healthcare, death care, and garbage management, and just as in City Skylines, we need to place those quite quickly. And you'll see there's a lot of progression that we have here. So these development points go into these development trees. There isn't much right now. So you can see we've got basic road services. You can determine what you're doing with electricity if you want to go down the geothermal power route and solar and so forth. You know, you can start with a battery station. Water's pretty straightforward, and then healthcare, you know, obviously has got some of the standard progressions, but right now that's all we can do. But one thing that I have found very helpful is this advanced road services. So you can see that's road maintenance, traffic light signs, as well as decorations. So we're going to use that, and that then opens up the rest of that tree as well for movement into the future. Alright, so I'm going to need to expand the grid in the other direction because I don't want to put services in the middle of the neighborhood. So let me see. Can I go? Yep, I can go my... Come on, I saw one. Oh, 112 was there. It's because of the geometry again. You know, we've got a bit of a challenge, but let's get this going as quickly as I can here. Alright, so we've got a little bit more of a grid. Let's go ahead. We're going to want to put the medical clinic somewhere at the edge. You can see there's some size to this. So we'll do that. We also need a cemetery. So, place that there. That should be good. So that looks like it connected up. Didn't do too crazy of a situation to the terrain there. So we'll see if we can soften it up a little bit. That may be the best we can do here. I didn't really look at the topography. Alright, so we've already got people who have died and need some help. You know, again, this is going on, but the challenge you've got in City Skylines 2 is you've got these pieces, so you can see the ambulance depot is in the footprint of the building, but the extension wing goes around it somewhere. So if you want to add some of these upgrades, you've just got to be careful with what you're doing. So the last piece here is this landfill, and I'm going to put that over in the industrial space. I think it is going to create ground pollution, which could become a water problem. Alright, I'm going to get rid of that building. I was debating leaving it, but this being an industrial zone, it just doesn't make any sense. I think that's pretty close to what I need. So we're going to put that there, and then we're going to run alleys in. Again, I want to do a snap to the building, so we're going to bring that in, and we're going to connect that here. That will get the connections we need. So you've got upgrades again, like there's a garbage truck depot that just attaches, and then there's a hazardous waste collection point and a waste recycling unit that you can add. And so again, these are extra buildings. You know, I think that just lets it do it within the site, but this is an extra building here, you know, which I guess we can fit on this side if we need to. So I really should have checked that before, you know, I placed it or so forth. But the other piece we need to do with this building, then, we need to set the landfill lot itself. So we want to drag this out and then kind of make it a bit larger, so that will square it up. And so that's the space that it can use to fill. So this should be working. I think it's on. Not quite sure why we don't have any vehicles operating, but I'll worry about that later, I suppose. Just make sure I don't see anything. So we've got healthcare, death care. We've done everything we can, and we've done the garbage processing. So the only piece that I want to start working on then is the industrial. If I expand over there to the train, I suppose I can add things on later. Because if I do this, I need to turn on the straight tool. I'm doing a terrible job with that. Alright, we can do that. Square that up. And then we'll go ahead and we'll get some industrial zoned in here, and I'm thinking that'll be enough. We'll see what happens with the line. But industry gets consumed pretty quickly. And then finally, now you can see we've got low density and medium density residential demand. And we have the green dot, and we can see we have this. So you can see this is row housing. So what I want to do is certainly get those to appear in a way that makes sense. So I'm gonna place these here, and we'll see how much. Doesn't look like it's consuming the demand yet, but I think we're in pretty good shape. That's coming down. So I wonder if these pedestrian paths are going to be problems for me. I'm trying to make things a little more walkable. Well, that doesn't go anywhere, so I need to fix that. Silly me. That's better. I don't know if the paths are as important, but right now I kind of wanted the row houses going this way, but you can see how long they are. And it doesn't look like they're gonna fit. So I think I'm gonna throw this out, because yeah, these are okay. Let me go back here. I'm gonna turn these down, and then we're gonna knock these all out. And then I'm gonna go back and try to zone them this way, because I want them on these roads. And then once these build up, now I can do this on the edges, because they'll line up on the roads the way I need them to. And so similarly, I want these to line up there. I think that's more than I need, though, because you can start to see how that's filling out. We need more low density residential, but I want to be careful because I also want commercial down the road here. So I'm going to go 4 deep on the road. We're going to make this kind of the commercial corridor. I'll let this one be a little bit larger, and then I'll go ahead and make the rest of this behind here residential housing. Now you have to be careful, because if you do that, it'll unzone what's there. So that is something new with City Skylines too, where you can overwrite zones. I'm wondering if these will develop at all because they're not on the street. I guess that'll be a good thing to see. But I'm thinking because they're not showing up, unless I make them part of the other piece, I don't think those are gonna actually operate, which is why they look the way they do. So let me then get these changed out, and then maybe we'll get other things that show up. Alright, so the demand is working out pretty well. I think at this point, this might be a good point to stop. We're getting close to the next milestone, but I don't want to make this episode too terribly long. But I've not necessarily intentionally left the frame rate up here. I think you can see it never really dropped below 55. You know, maybe once in a while it bounced up and down. So the settings with the hardware I have are pretty good. We've made a little bit of progress. You've started to see a little bit of the unique setup and so forth in how the game works versus City Skylines 1. But hope you've enjoyed the journey here. If you have and you haven't dropped a like, please consider doing that. And if you are not a subscriber, please consider doing that. I certainly do love city building, so now that City Skylines 2 is out, my intention is to spend more time within a city builder than I have on the channel before. I kind of realized when I started with City Skylines originally on the channel that we were so close. City Skylines 2 had been announced and so forth. And so that kept my enthusiasm down a little bit, because it was like, I'm just going to get going with something and then it's going to be time to switch to City Skylines 2. So now that it's here, expect a lot more content on the channel. We'll keep making progress and keep working on things, and absolutely looking for commentary guidance. You know, if you guys have things you've discovered as we all start to understand this game together, let's make each other better. So let me know what you think I should maybe do differently, what you've tried that has worked well that I haven't put into place in the city, and we'll see how things go. But I will see you next time.